Hi.
Hello. Hi, Stephanie. How are you?
I'm good, Christy. How are you?
I'm great. I am so honored to be celebrating the publication of your book, Carry the Dog.
Thank
It's a
you.
beautiful novel, came out yesterday, and I have been looking forward to talking to you. I'm going to let you talk, but first I have to gush. I've read so far this year. I've read 87 books, and that's
Wow.
that's a record. I'm anxious and insomniac, so I turned it to books.
Yeah.
I think it's very unseemly to rank books, but I just have to say your book is like in the top 2 of 87 that I've read, and
Wow.
it's a huge gift to the world, and I know readers are going to just dive in and fall in love with it. I've talked to
Wow.
booksellers are already in love with it. And what I thought we could do to start, for anybody who hasn't had a chance, who pre-ordered and just got it yesterday, can you just tell us, like, give the elevator pitch, like, what is Carry the Dog and how do you describe it?
Okay, so first of all, I describe it poorly. I should just preface by saying that I still haven't perfected my elevator pitch. The book has, I think, in my opinion, a lot of plot. So it's kind of hard to just kind of rip into what it's about. But it's the protagonist, Bea Seger, is on the cusp of age 60. And she's had a lifetime full of early trauma and then disappointments. Many of those disappointments are disappointments we all have experienced. And also on the cusp of 60, we start to take stock and think about the ways we want to go forward with our lives and what have we learned and what patterns do we recognize, not that we recognize all of them, but which ones do we recognize and maybe want to course correct a little bit, not repeat those patterns to make the most of whatever's left. I think one of the lines Bea says is, there's less time ahead than behind me now, and I can't pretend that that's not true. And she wants to make the most of the time she has left. And the way she's hampered is by some trauma she suffered in her childhood. She had a mother who was a very famous photographer who became a notorious photographer for taking nude images of Bea as a child with her 2 brothers who were also children. And so it has, of course, people will hear echoes of Sally Mann, but I honestly think that Sally Mann's photographs are beautiful and not exploitative. And I hope I make that distinction in the book. I try to. Anyway, so Bea must sort of figure out how to go forward with this immense trauma, which is now unleashed by 2 cultural icons. MoMA comes calling and wants to kind of lionize her mother, go back into the archives and start it all up again. And Hollywood comes calling. A very well-known producer wants to do a biopic of Bea's mother. So she lives modestly, doesn't have a lot of money. She's still dependent on an ex-husband. And she's starting to think that maybe it's time that she leverages the past to help her move forward into the future.
That is an awesome elevator pitch, by the way. Like, that's really good. And
I'm glad I hope it's being recorded so that
yes, yeah, you can just memorize this later.
I'm not drinking. I'm drinking Pellegrino. Just
you're not just swigging a drink. I love your elevator pitch. I love the themes that you touched on. And I really want to say thank you for having a protagonist who is a woman who is 59. I feel a little torn about calling that out because it feels like I shouldn't have to, but also I'm starving for that. I'm starving for it. And I want there to be dynamic, complicated, hilarious, striving women of all ages that I can find in books. It shouldn't be hard. It shouldn't stand out, and it does. That's just that is the reality.
Like sex, women who like sex.
Yes, and pleasure, and that's what I've most adored. Well, there's so many things I adore about Bea. In addition, she's, that she's smart and she's savvy and she's not done. Like, she's not
Totally not done.
I love her. You touched on this. I love that she's aware of time. She's aware. She mentions it a lot. She's also aware of the cultural meanings of her body and her. You know, we all know that as women get older, we become more invisible, and she plays with that and interacts with that. But she's also going to get on a bicycle and go across town and take selfies, and it felt very true and very hopeful and very, very alive. I want alive characters over the age of 32, please. So thank you for that.
So just to jump in for 1 second, I'm so committed to that idea about both embracing invisibility if everybody's not on board with my visibility, but also maintaining my own visibility to myself. And I'm so on board with it that in my jacket, the book jacket, I have had them put my age when I published my first novel, which was, I was 60. And so I really, you know, kind of fought for that. You know, I was like, this is it. Let's just own it. And I don't know, just be, I want to be like really fully me, I guess. And I wanted Bea to be fully Bea. So
I love that. And I know as a writer and people who I know who are, they're striving for that first publication ring. They want the brass ring and they're anxious. They're over 40, they're over 50. And for you to put that in, it's an incredible service to creators of all kind, but certainly writers, and certainly to the women writers who are in my circle. And I pull out your name all the time. Like, you know how there's this tropes of like, you know, the sad writer who can't get the publishing deal, and someone always trots out, J.K. Rowling was a single mother and she got rejected. Every time I hear it, the number gets higher and higher, 100,000 times.
Right.
And that's inspiring, but we need more models of inspiration, which you've given us. So thank you.
I'm 65 now, novel number 2. And I'm always I wince a little when I see, well, she wasn't published until age 40, you know, talking about somebody else. And I'm like, age 40? It took me another 20 years after 40. So, I mean, anyway, I'm so glad that resonated with you, because I was on a little bit of a mission there.
Yeah, a mission accomplished for this reader and this writer. But I want to go back to the beginning. There's so many places I want to dig in, but one of them is what can you tell us about the very first spark of this story? Where you, like, I had this idea in my head that you were at a museum looking at photography or looking at Sally Mann's work. What's the origin story of this novel?
Yeah, you know, I tried to come up with like a super clever origin story answer. And I think I have a few things that spurred me on. Certainly having had my own trials and tribulations of a lifetime, and also figuring out how to navigate through with my sense of humor intact and my sense of self not only intact, but evolving. So that was always on my mind and is always on my mind, because it's a practice, right? Being that person is not just a person you flower into, you're being that person every day. So I think about it a lot. And the second thing is, I had written, in support of my first book, I'd written an essay. And in the essay, I talked about one of my daughters. And well, I talked about both my daughters, but in one case, my daughter had struggled with a certain issue, and I wrote about it in the essay. And with her permission, she had read it. She's a grown-up, and I would never publish anything that she didn't approve of. But once it was out in the world, it's a different thing, right? Than saying, oh, sure, this looks great, Mom, go for it. So we were sitting at a bar having a drink, toasting the essay. And I said, you know, all this book attention, it's a lot. It's hard to be suddenly the center of attention. And how have you been feeling about the essay? And she said, yeah, I too feel it. And I don't love it so much. So I walked away from that and thought about mothers and daughters and ownership of the body and the story. And when is your child's narrative theirs alone? And when do they possess themselves? And, you know, it's kind of an interesting question, especially for women artists in the mid-century, right? So those two things kind of converged. I've always been a Sally Mann fan. I've always been a Diane Arbus fan. I love Susan Sontag. I mean, these twin cultural signposts, I think, of photography and rock and roll kind of grew up together at the time that I grew up. So I've always, like many boomers, see those two things as hand in hand. And and so that too was in the mix of the origin story. I was fascinated by watching old rock stars, you know, old guys being rock stars. And it just kind of fascinated me about how rock and roll has gotten old. And so those are the threads of the origin story.
Oh, I love that. That's as pleasing as I would want it to be. And, I love, you touched on this a little bit, but there's so much about photography, technical, and I was so impressed about, like, even the vocabulary around photography, like Bea's mom, she was under the hood, and I was like, did I know that was called a hood? Like, I didn't make me trip up, but I was just like, it was very clear that you have a very deep understanding of photography at that time. And I'm wondering, how did you get that? Where'd that come from?
So I don't think you can really see, but there's a stack of books right there.
Yeah.
And those are the books I read for this book about photography. And the more I read, the more fascinated I became. And I, at some points, even forgot that I was reading in order to do research. And, just this, the intensity of a moment frozen and kind of the ramifications of that, especially in this book for these kids, right? They're kind of stuck. They're trapped like an amber almost. And it has a profound effect on all of them. So I don't know. I just was fascinated with photography, fascinated with rock and roll. And I kept reading and reading and reading. And then I read the Diane Arbus bio, which was great, which was not by Arthur LeBeau. And there's two of them. And the Arthur LeBeau one was fascinating. And when I read that book, I really committed fully to having Bea's mother be a photographer, because I kind of went back and forth on what her art would be. Yeah. Because photography is, I don't know what the word is, but it's literal, right? It's very literal. And the topic I was writing about is heavy and dark. And I wasn't sure I wanted it to be so literal, because I'm not trying to write an upsetting book, but upsetting things happen.
Yeah.
But once I read Diane Arbus, I was like, I'm just going to go for it. And I did.
What I find fascinating about the photograph, that I really thought about it when you were teasing this out in your novel, that we don't know. I mean, obviously, when you look at a photograph, you're seeing that frame. And this whole novel is about what's outside of the frame, what's the context, what's happening to these kids, how have they been conscripted into their mother's art. And it made me think about, we have so many images in a day coming at us, and especially everything that's going on in the polarizing parts of our culture. It's like, I don't even know what kind of images to trust, and what kind of investigation I should do about any piece of art or a photograph that's on the internet. Like, I don't even know. And they're so powerful, especially when they involve children. Like the children, I know Lydia Yuknovich has done a lot of, she's got a book called, now I'm blanking on it. It's
The Chronology of Water.
Chronology of Water is her memoir, but she also wrote, it's the novel about war, like a war photographer, and you capture, like, I think about images of children in war, like the young girl with the napalm and the refugees, that that's right up to current day. And
Absolutely. Yeah.
what is the responsibility of those of us, small backs of children? That's Lydia.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Okay.
As a side note, if
Small backs. Yeah. Yeah.
yes, if anybody wants to, this is a side note, if anybody wants to order Stephanie's wonderful novel, there's a button at the bottom to click. If you have a question or want to join us in the chat or have a question for Stephanie, pop it in the chat or ask a question and we'll move you to the top of the queue. Otherwise, I'm just going to indulge my own questions. But I'm thinking about, like, when I think about, so I'll make a confession. When I was reading your book and the first, it's clear that, she's got these two suitors, essentially Hollywood and the MoMA. I'm in my head, like, I knew there was something about the photographs that were traumatic and exploitative for the children. It was before I had the details, but I was very much like, yeah, go get yours, Bea. Go get it. Like, you can cut financial ties with your ex-husband.
Yeah, right.
You can, if anyone should profit off your trauma, it should be you.
Right.
And then at the end of the book, I was like kind of embarrassed. Like, I could see that we were not that I don't want to give away any spoilers, but I could see that I was probably not in the right. Like, that there was a better way for her to go. But God, I kind of did want her to get some money.
So totally on board with that idea. But she had been so conditioned. She had been so exposed.
Yeah.
And then had been so conditioned to recede. Right. That going and getting anything was just not yet in her. It was in her DNA, but she had to dig a little for it. So,
yes.
And just to go back to the convo for a second about photography, like the brothers in the book are twins, and that came from this. The very famous Diane Arbus photograph, right?
Yes.
And I always loved that picture, just loved it. And so that's why I made the boys twins, because I kind of wanted to channel Diane Arbus. Yeah.
I loved that. And I love to, you in your book, you quote, and Diane Arbus quote, which is, a photograph is a secret about a secret. Right. I have chills. And I just wondered if, at what point in your drafting or research did you find that quote? Because it's so perfect for your project. How did that quote, what was your relationship to that quote as you were working on this?
I knew that quote before I even had a thought of writing a book. I always loved it because, when you study photographs or go to a museum and look at, I remember, I don't know what year it was, Cindy Sherman got the whole floor at MoMA. Mm-hmm. And it was just dazzling and crazy, just so powerful. And I think the idea about a photograph being a secret about a secret is that it connects to that same thought about a photograph being a moment frozen in time. So the photographer is, first of all, framing for you, right? So telling you what to look at. And that none of that is a coincidence. That's by design. And so there's a lot happening that the viewer never knows.
Yeah.
And there's also a lot happening that the subjects don't know. Like the subject of Diane Arbus's photographs don't know. In some cases, they were mentally challenged or physically disabled. They didn't know what those photographs would come to represent.
Right.
They just thought they were having the picture taken. So the idea of the photographer being a little bit of a Houdini or a magician always appeals to me. And I know photographers, and I know the magic they perform. And so I think that quote in particular is about Bea figuring out the secrets and reclaiming a reality that she didn't know for 50 something years existed.
Right.
And
I find that What I think was very relatable about Bea is the push-pull of wanting to know, and evidence was there. Like there was the storage unit, and she could have done some digging all those years, and she wasn't ready. It's sort of, you can't force yourself to be ready to look at anything. And maybe, there was a confluence of events, right? She's got MoMA calling, she's got this Hollywood offer, her age, just things were happening. Her father passes early in the novel,
Yeah,
and
right.
it feels, that's how real life is. It's not
Yeah.
like one day you're like, you come out of a therapy session or watching Oprah, and you're like, I'm ready to face my past. It's like, sometimes we feel pushed into it, and that's a little bit how it seems
So
for Bea.
the storage unit, which is a favorite little trope for me, came to me because every divorced friend I have has had a storage unit and has had to go through that storage unit without the help of anyone, no ex-husband, no kids, just alone in a dark, dusty, overcrowded storage unit. And I've heard the story numerous times, and I did it myself. So it was such a powerful imagery for me about, those, what's behind all those zillions of doors, and so much of life and disappointment and loss is locked away. And
Yeah.
I've watched women friends, and I myself have gone, unlocked that door and had to go in and confront it.
Yeah. That was so powerfully rendered. I think anybody who's, maybe not even for parents, but like you said, divorced, or, I mean, I don't have a storage unit yet,
Yeah.
but there's drawers, there's trunks, there's
Yeah.
attics, and that was so, so well rendered. And just what I thought was really well done as well in that scene, when it's like, it overcame her body. She had such a physical
Yeah.
reaction that I guess I'd like to talk for a minute about the way how to write trauma. I feel like you could do a master class on writing trauma.
I'm writing that down.
Yeah, please. I mean, first there's the sort of like, as she's inching towards it, in the storage unit, and she's sort of like, she has a full body reaction to
Yeah.
what she's seeing, and that's even before she's like really gone deep.
Yeah.
And then when you eventually give the reader more information about the nap, or what the childhood, what these subjects were enduring
Right.
to be subjects, it was so delicately handled, and so because it could have just gone so wrong. It could have gone so wrong. So how'd you know how to write that? Did you have to do a bunch of drafts, or did you have an instinct, a light touch, and leaning on the imagery? Like the doll dropping from the bed for me was like, oh, that's when I knew I should stop rooting for Hollywood. Like, to put my capitalist ass back, get out of the way.
Yeah.
There were just, it felt like that's when I knew I could really feel your poetry origins, because you were going to give us images and sensations, and we weren't going to get a lurid play-by-play.
Yeah.
Could you just talk about that?
Yeah. I mean, this kind of, we start to get a little geeky here because it goes into the craft thing. But, there are times when I write, and you might have this experience too. I'm literally closed. I have my eyes closed, and I'm just typing. And I experience, when I write, I do experience, not through the whole thing, but there are places where I experience a full body commitment to it. I can feel that moment, especially in the storage unit, like all her senses are engaged.
Yeah.
The sound, everything is kind of pinging for her. And I really try to get very, very much in touch with my body when I'm writing, especially if I'm writing scenes like the ones you called out. So that's not, I don't know how satisfying an answer that is, but it is definitely crafty, geeky, just how I just channel.
Yeah. Well, whatever you do, it works, and it's beautifully done. And to switch gears a little bit, I want to talk about rock and roll. Like, my first question is, what's the first live show you ever saw, and what kind of a fan were you? Like, it seems to me like you know your stuff when
I
you're
know my
writing.
stuff.
Yeah, like give us a party girl story.
All right. So I was definitely a party girl. I had a really, really, really good time in the 70s and very early 80s. But so now, remember earlier when I said how proud I was of my age? Well, now I'm going to tell you the first rock and roll show I've ever seen. And it's like, it's in the Wagonosphere. The first rock and roll show I ever saw was Sly and the Family Stone
Oh,
at Madison Square Garden. Yes, so embarrassing.
that is amazing.
My dad drove us and went and waited in a bar, or a restaurant, waited for us and then drove us home. So that's the first rock and roll show I ever saw. And then both, I have mixed feelings about saying this part of the answer, but a lot of my interest and love of rock and roll came through whatever guy I was with at the time. Like, my girlfriends weren't listening to music that was as sophisticated as the boys were. And I just was enthralled, and learned so much from, I'm a good listener, and I learned so much from listening. And I will tell a funny story, and readers haven't seen this yet, but if you buy the book, you will. The scene where on Bea's prom night, she goes to a club in Queens and sees the New York Dolls. That happened to me.
I knew it. That is amazing.
That is lifted and shifted from my, I did not run off and become a groupie the next morning. My parents would not have had it. But I went and saw the New York Dolls, and in my prom dress.
Awesome.
And I was like, it was mind blowing. I had never seen anything like it. And it was just, it really, really, these little things that at the time you don't realize, it had a profound impact on me, because I realized that there was a depth and breadth to rock and roll that I hadn't previously known. The other kind of cool thing, I think it's cool, is that Bea writes a certain song in the novel. Yes. And that song is kind of co-opted by her ex-husband, and he makes a lot of money off the song and becomes actually quite famous for it. And she doesn't get much out of it. That song, I was cleaning out. Well, I'm always trying to clean out, but not always cleaning out journals from my youth.
Yeah.
That song I lifted and shifted out of my 22-year-old journal.
Oh my God. Now that I hadn't guessed that. I was like, oh, look at this poet writing this rock and roll song. Nope. That is amazing. Like, those scenes were so fun. And the scene that's later in the book when Bea's her sister, essentially, her half sister.
Yeah, Echo.
Yeah, when they go see the show, it's like the Resurgence show or whatever.
Yeah.
I just felt like you had really nailed the, I'm starting to see, my favorite musician to see live is Willie Nelson, and he's 88. So I'm watching things sort of, look different. They're looking different these days. So they're
looking different these days.
Yeah. And there's something about, I knew you were a true fan because there's the way that you write it from inside of affection for music. And there's so much to make fun of these aging rockers. They could just be, caricatures. Cheesy. Yeah. Totally cheesy. Even the ones that I'm still sort of like I saw John Bon Jovi somewhere recently, and I was like, I
totally agree.
In my mind, he's still 30, but
I know it's very difficult.
Yeah. So that's what I sort of feel like the benefit of having writers of all ages reflect on cultural events, because I feel like there's something more interesting to say about an aging rocker. Like, what is the place of a song that people, like, different generations discover? And I really loved, I mean, I love the storyline of course, this woman who wrote the song that made these men famous didn't get full credit.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
at the same time, Bee's not, she never feels like a victim.
Right.
I mean, she is a victim, but she doesn't, it hasn't ground her down. She still has her full spirit and her.
I mean, I'd love to talk about that for a second, because not all she does not, I don't, and she doesn't feel like a victim, despite, you know, the many opportunities I can use, put on those glasses and feel that way. And that's not because I'm not a victim. It's because I don't want to feel like a victim.
Yeah.
So I'm, as I said earlier about becoming and growing, and it's a daily practice,
Yeah.
and not being victimized is a daily practice too. We don't all have the luxury of being able to shrug off trauma, and I'm not suggesting that we should be shrugging off trauma. We're very lucky to have the mental health support available to us if we do. But having said that, sometimes you got to shrug it off.
Yeah.
I do think that Bea manages to not be a victim. And the other thing I want to say about it is, men, my heart is warmed because I have had such fantastic response to this book from men, because she doesn't hate him. She loves him. Even though they've been through all this complicated nonsense, and she still understands him and loves him, and she feels very tender towards him. And even though they've been divorced twice and he's cheated on her, none of this is spoilers. These aren't spoilers, but she's still, you know, they've endured.
Yes.
And endurance is a thing, and it's important, and it counts, especially at age 60.
Yes, I was reading your book alongside watching the HBO remake of Scenes of a Marriage.
Oh yeah.
And I was just like,
yeah, I watched that too.
I just feel like I love work that will dig into the mess of relationships, I mean, I think having relationships is traumatic. Like, that's just my cynical take on things. Like, and I do love the affection between Bea and her ex, and also the just sort of like, he's a body that she knows, she's a body that he knows, and that she's back to the beauty and the sublime nature that Bea still wants to feel pleasure. She still wants to look good. She wants to feel good.
Yep.
She wants pleasure, and she wants the dog to like her. I just like, I want to be that multidimensional. And this is reminding me of the scene. I love the scene where she goes back to the home of the Hollywood producer.
Yeah.
I guess he's a producer.
All right. So don't give anything away here. No.
Okay. Oh yeah, that's true. I love, like, I want to be as alive as Bea is today. I'm 48, and I want to have as much like gusto and verve as she has, and I really appreciate that. Another thing I wanted to ask you about that was really something that I noticed that I really loved was how naming things works in your book. And in the very beginning, Bea tells us,
music to the ears. Thank you.
Yeah, she's like,
I worked hard on the names.
Yeah, it really shows. And just and what they mean, like, so she's named, she and her siblings are all named after famous photographers. They're, you know, people try to introduce her as Bernice Marx Seger. She's like, no, I got rid of the Marx. And then, you know, her mother's pretension, right? Like, she's got a brother named Henry. The mother calls him Henri. And everybody's got just the way names work. Can you just talk about that process? Because it's special. In your book, it's very special.
Thank you. I'd love to talk about that. Everyone in the novel, except for one character, and this would be a spoiler, so I'm not going to give too much away. Everyone has multiple names.
Yeah.
Everyone. And that was, of course, by design. And it was to show, it was a little bit of a expansion of the idea of photography being a secret about a secret. So everyone has a name, but then they have this other identity and this other name, and certain people gaze at them and see one name, and some people say another name. And the shifting identities was important to me, because I think that we are shifting identities as we go through life. At every stage and age, we are all of ourselves, and then we have to integrate all that mess. And so I think that the shifting names kind of was my attempt to demonstrate that. There is one character whose name does not change, and I'm not going to say much more about that. And that's significant too.
Yeah, that was really, I felt like what I related to as well is like her longings, and not all of them she can fully articulate. And I really appreciated her relationship with she's essentially like dog sitting long term. And this dog doesn't really seem to like her.
Not a very nice dog.
Yeah, like I'm just sort of like, oh, this dog is an asshole. And she wants to win the dog over. And when her sister comes, the dog prefers the sister. I just felt like that to me was like very consistent, right? Like her way. I have a friend who says, how I do anything is how I do everything. Yeah. And I thought of that saying with Bea, like,
I love that.
Yeah. Isn't that like, it's super profound. I have to think about it kind of hard. But the way that Bea interacts with the dog and with her sister and with Gary, like there's like very much a consistency there. And there's sort of, I like that she's not an addict, or like, you know, that she's not.
That was on purpose. Yeah. I mean,
like, yeah, she likes her. That's true. Yeah. But that she's not like, and I went to AA. Like, I don't mind a recovery novel, but
I was staying away from that, of course, on purpose. The dog, first of all, I'm a big dog person. Like, you know, my kids would say my brand is dogs.
Okay.
They have said that. And so dogs keep making their way into not only both novels, but everything I write. They're always, somehow dogs are in there. But I also wanted to write about not such a nice dog, because there are dogs that are kind of assholes. So I wanted to give her a problematic dog that she still fell in love with.
Yes. I thought that was, to me, that seemed like, not hope, but it's sort of like if I was charting Bea's transformation, you know, she's still got this impulsiveness. When she feels wronged, she lashes out. But that doesn't mean she's not a tender person, and not a person who's kind of soaked in grief and longing and trying to figure this all out.
And lashing out incorrectly. You know, she's making mistakes, and she's like, oh, I did it again, you know.
Right. Which is also very, very human and very human. And what's I suppose inspiring about her is that she just keeps getting back in there, you know, like you show her instead of doubling down and like becoming more and more isolated, she's like, well, let me try this. How about this was the wrong way. This was the wrong way in on this relationship. I'm going to try this lane. And her experimentation and her sort of openness was really inspiring to me. I love that. This was another thing I was thinking about reading your book. Who could play Bea in the movie Carrie the Dog?
Well, that is a question that keeps getting asked right now. And I hope that some Hollywood producer, you know, I hope I can leverage my book. And so, I mean, I just saw, I watched Maid, you know. The Stephanie Land memoir.
Yes.
And I thought Andie MacDowell was fabulous.
Yes.
So I added her to my list. I also love Maura Tierney.
Oh,
I think she'd be really, really, really good.
Yes, that's a good one.
I like Sandy Bullock. I can't say I don't.
Yeah, she's great too. I think I was in the wrong generation, but I was very wedded once I once I understood Bea, probably like along about chapter, maybe like page 30, I
Yeah.
was like picturing Jean Smart, who
Oh
I
yeah.
think
Oh,
is
yes. Sign me.
amazing.
Yeah.
Maybe slightly older than Bea,
That's
but
okay. I'll adjust.
and then of course I was like, could Meryl Streep do this? And I was like,
The
I don't
other,
know.
one of my all-time favorite, longtime favorite actresses who I also think would be perfect is Diane Lane.
Oh yeah, she's so good.
Yeah, so good.
Yes,
So we'll see.
I could see them doing the actresses you mentioned. They would have the right blend of tenderness and humor and rage. That's the other thing too. Let's talk about the rage for a minute. I loved it. I love a scene where if I just, this is my own personal belief. If you're really going to get well and get over the humps of trauma or disappointment, I mean, not all disappointment is trauma, but if you're going to move forward in life, I think you have to express rage. I mean, that's just been my experience. And I thought that, I mean, I agree that some of like her major rage scene, she's probably going about it the wrong way. She's burning bridges, right? I mean, not for forever, but
Well, she's also made some assumptions that are incorrect.
Right. And I would have too. Like, I think that's part of, it was all very plausible. She never seemed crazy.
No.
And I just really appreciated her just unfurling this rage and disappointment that she felt. And I'm wondering how you felt about the rage as you were writing it, or what you wanted to give her.
I'm going to grab, I don't have it, but I don't actually express rage in my life. And, not that I don't have it, but I guess I tend to sublimate it. And I don't even really show anger. I can be sarcastic, or I can be a little bit cutting, but I never really like let it out and get really mad. So in my first book called The Next,
okay,
this character rages like crazy. And I loved writing it. I loved being able to finally rage, but through the keyboard. So I did give Bea some rage too, but she's probably more like I am in real life, which is I tend not to rage. And I agree with you that sometimes you just gotta rage. I think these days, if I'm raging, it's probably about politics or,
Oh yeah.
Yeah, something like that.
Yeah. That's really funny. I was listening to a podcast today. It's called Keep It. And they were talking about, does anyone ever really scream anymore? Or is that like either in the movies or in real life? Now that we have text and email and more sophisticated or just more mediated ways to express ourselves in relationships, does anyone ever have like screaming fights? You don't see it in the movies, first of all, and then also
you see it in Target and Walmart.
Well, right, yeah, you see it, or school board meetings, yeah, exactly.
Yeah, it's maybe a little misplaced. I don't know.
I would say so, but I definitely found great pleasure in that. Let me just remind everybody who's listening, if you want to buy the book, Stephanie's book, please click and buy through Barbara's. And let's see, we do have a question. We have a question. What projects are you both working on next?
Oh, Christie, I'd love to hear it. What are you working on?
Oh Lord. So my first book was a memoir, and I was like, well, I'm going to write fiction now. I've said everything I need to say. And then sort of a memoir fell out of me. And I'm writing a book about, I'm writing essentially a memoir about a friendship and about female friendship.
Oh,
it's a place where I have had some growth.
Yes.
Put it that way.
Yes,
I have not, I used to be the kind of person who would say, well, I'm not cut out for female friendship. I can't do it.
Right.
And that turned out not to be true, but I had some work to do. So it's sort of the story of how does one who thinks she can't be a good friend become a good enough friend,
That's beautiful. That is a beautiful theme.
Thank you.
I love that.
What about you?
So I'm trying to find my way into my next novel. And I'm not going to say too much, but it's about, it's got a title, so I can say that. It's called The Good Provider. And it's about, I haven't really read about this in fiction. It's about men and women and marriage and money.
Oh.
So yeah, so 80% of divorces end end because of financial stress. But I've never really read a novel about it, and that could be my blindness, that it's out there and I just haven't come across it. But I kind of want to get into that topic a little bit.
Oh, that is so juicy. I love that.
Yeah, I think it's kind of juicy. So that's what I'm working on.
It does feel like money topics are still, there's not a lot of taboo, but that just still feels like one I had seen on Twitter. I'm not on Twitter anymore because I'm way too fragile, but I saw, before I exited very quietly, there was you might have seen this too. There was a thread publishing, like hashtag publishing paid me. And people were saying, illustrating the point that writers of color are grossly underpaid for their work, and they were putting up their numbers. Yeah, I was, or my like very famous writers were like, my first advance was blah blah. I mean, I was so uncomfortable. I was sweating reading it.
Yeah.
I was like, how are these people talking about money? I would almost rather hear how they had sex. Like that's how, but that's how taboo it feels. So I love that you're going to just like open that door for us and go in there.
Well, two things you said strike me. One was about women and friendships. And when I have the feeling of, oh, why are they talking about that? Or, oh, I can't do that. I can't go there. Over time, I have learned to stop right there and take a look.
Yes, that is so.
Because I feel those things exactly the same way you do. And I feel it in the body. I start to get like,
yes.
And then as a writer, I try to think, hey, what's going on here with me and that topic? And that's definitely what sends me to the keyboard.
Yeah. So I have a question too. When you were working on Carrie the Dog, do you have like writing idols, or I call them North Stars, works or authors who you're like, I know I have to be me and I have my own voice and viewpoint or whatever, but like I'm aiming for like how I felt when I read their work. Who is that for you?
It's like choosing my favorite child.
I know.
I mean, I love Rachel Kushner and Lauren Groff.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, to be quite honest, I still am a big fan of Graham Greene and John le Carré. I love the psychological underpinnings of why we take action, and, even why people choose certain careers. It always has something to do with daddy, usually.
Yes, 100%.
I feel like every single thing happening in the country right now is like unresolved daddy issues.
100%.
It's like, but I read a book this year that I truly loved, which was called Go Went Gone by Jenny Epperneck. She's a German writer, and it was about immigrants in Berlin. And it taught me so much about immigration and, the kind of much deeper story there about why people leave their homelands and how they integrate into new societies. So I loved her. I love, I just was lucky enough to read the Jonathan Franzen book, and I really loved it. I was so prepared not to.
Same.
And it was completely pulled in. And, and I admired that book because he writes in a beautifully balanced way about religion. Mm-hmm. And that's not easy to do. And he just pulls it off, I thought, brilliantly. I'm actually going to look and see, what else did I read this year that I loved? Oh, I just finished The Vegetarian by Han Kang.
Oh, whoa.
Crying in H Mart, the memoir.
I love that book. And every time I hear it, it makes my mouth water. I want that food.
I know. But so that's what I've been reading over the last year or so. I have not read as many as you, sadly. But Shirley Hazard, I'm a big fan.
Oh,
Yeah, big fan.
interesting.
So honestly, if there were an icon for me, it would be Shirley Hazard. I love Wisława Szymborska, the poet. So in the mornings, I don't know where I learned this trick, but in the mornings, the first thing I do is with a cup of coffee is grab a poetry book at random off my shelf and just flip through and do some reading, because I'm, as we all are, so easily sucked into social media.
Yes.
And I try to obey the Jane Kenyon rules. Do you know those great?
No.
Can I read them?
Please.
Because they're on, I always have them right on my bulletin board. So that's what I'm looking at. So Jane Kenyon's rules of writing are: tell the whole truth. Don't be lazy. Don't be afraid. Close the critic out. Take chances in the interest of clarity of emotion. Be a good steward of your gifts, which I love. Protect your time. Feed your inner life. Avoid too much noise. Read good books. Have good sentences in your ears. So that's what prompts me to go for the poems in the morning. Be by yourself as often as you can. Walk. Take the phone off the hook and work regular hours.
Oh my God. Where has that been all my life?
I know. I stare at it. You know, it's like my mission statement.
Those are really, really practical. And I have a question. Actually, I have two more. If anybody else has a question, I don't want to hog the mic. So feel free to post it. And just being sure I'm not missing it. Okay. For somebody like maybe me who has never had any poetry instruction and feels super intimidated, what's a portal book that would get me started, break down I don't want to read about a Grecian urn, but I know I want poetry in my life. So where do I go?
I hate to say this because it seems very, to me, facile or simplistic answer, but I would get like a Norton's anthology of poetry and dig into a compendium of a million different poets and figure out what voices appeal to you. I mean, I know this is incredibly old-fashioned and politically incorrect, probably, but I still love T.S. Eliot for the economy of words and the very, very deep, big, heavy topics.
Yeah.
He's not afraid to tackle. I got a million of them. This is a topic I'd have to talk about in another call. Mary Oliver. Mary Oliver is kind of easy. So she is the epigraph of my book.
Oh, I noticed that. Yes. I do. Every time I see any quote or meme or anything by Mary Oliver, I'm always like, I understand that. Like, what are you going to do with your one wild and precious life?
There you go. So that maybe, I think we wrap soon, right? Are we?
Yes, I think we have like 6 minutes. Yeah.
So, I mean, the Mary Oliver poem that is really the theme of the book. Yeah. It's the theme of Carry the Dog. And it's called The Uses of Sorrow. And it's 2 sentences. So don't worry, guys. And The Uses of Sorrow. In my sleep, I dreamed this poem. She writes in the parenthetical. Someone I loved once gave me a box full of darkness. It took me years to understand that this too was a gift.
That is the perfect opening.
Pretty much says it all.
The dog. Yeah, absolutely. That is fabulous. I promised my writing groups I would ask you one writer-y question. Well, I guess it's a two-parter. One is, what advice do you have for people who are toiling away, working on their novels or their memoirs? And secondly, do you have a writing group? Do you do classes? Do you just send it to your agent? How does the manuscript go from your head to the book we hold in our hands today?
Yeah, I mean, I'll answer number 2 first. One of the gifts of being a late bloomer, which I use that term loosely because I feel I'm still blooming, but is that I don't really hyper focus anymore on classes, and I'm not worried about my MFA, and I don't have all that kind of in the way. So I really do just sit down with these Jane Kenyon rules that seem simple but are hard to achieve daily. And working regular hours is critical for me. So there's that. And then the first question was about process, right? What are suggestions for, yeah. So the one thing, I literally, in writing my debut, I was in my 50s. I think I was started at 57, and I bought, before they were the evil empire, I bought like every craft book on Amazon, and just read and then put one aside and then tried to work and then read another one. And the thing that I learned that seems, maybe everybody knows this, I did not, was that just as we were talking about with you and the friendship and the money, and you're at a point of resistance, the point of resistance is part of it.
Yeah.
The point of resistance is where you're supposed to be. And when I read the craft books, every other famous writer, Stephen King, whomever, all of them, always had met the challenges that I was meeting. And I thought I just didn't have an MFA and didn't know enough, and I should get in a writing group. But that was not the case. The case was I was where you get when you're writing. So I guess I shy away from the word advice, but what I learned when I read a dozen craft books off Amazon is that process includes challenges.
And the resistance, this is so funny. I was talking about
Stephen Pressfield's War of Art.
Yes.
And he talks about this a lot. It's a very tiny little book, and I highly recommend it for writers because he talks about the internal editor a lot and how to shut that down. And the same idea of when you're at a point of resistance, that's where you're supposed to stay and figure it out, not go in another direction.
Right. That I probably obviously cannot hear that enough. Like sometimes when I hit resistance in writing,
you have another 10, 12 years and then you'll be my age. And
I sometimes make up a story about resistance that, it's hard, therefore it's not meant to be, instead of hard is, like you said, it's part and parcel of the process of the work, and it's an ingredient. It's not a sign.
I actually do a lot of developmental editing, in my day job. And I'm mentoring MFA students starting in January for Stony Brook University. Yeah. So I'm really excited about that. So I talk about craft a lot, and I talk about writing a lot. And, I've only really started on this track in the last 6-7 years. So I've written 2 novels and a dozen essays and some short stories and some poems. So it's never too late.
Well, those students are very, very lucky. They are they're gonna be so well held by you and all of your experience, strength, and hope. It's an amazing thing. It is 6:58. I want to be mindful of the time. Anybody else have a question they want to pop in to the question box? Please do. In the chat, I can see that our hosts have said after the event, there'll be a replay accessible. It'll be on the YouTube page for the Bookstore, which is a wonderful thing. And is there anything else that, that you hope that the readers know and take away from Carrie the dog?
I mean, yes, the thing that's most important to me is for readers to go to the book in the first place, knowing it's about dark and light, not dark, and that my character is living a real life and stands in the sun and finds herself in shadow, but keeps moving ahead. And at the risk of being too personal, that's how I live my life. And I just am so thrilled that that came through to you. It's the book is now out in the world, and it's always dicey as to whether you've communicated properly, whether it's a book or an essay or even talking to somebody face to face. And I feel heard. And that is just such a gift.
Oh, Carry the Dog is such a gift. I hope that everybody engages with it. If you are strapped for cash and can't buy multiple copies, another thing you can do to support authors is request it from your library so that they know that readers want this book, and that it's important to you to support art that speaks to us.
It's a library journal pick, so maybe libraries are happy to will have it.
Oh, that's amazing. Stephanie, this has been such a pleasure. Your work is a pleasure. I'm so grateful to you for your work, for this conversation. And I can't wait to read all the things you have to say about money and divorce and property.
If I have the nerve to say it, maybe I'll resist.
Well, you fiction writers, y'all can go wherever you want.
Yeah.
I'm very jealous.
I'm so thankful for this conversation. It's always wonderful to talk about my work and reach readers. It's so gratifying. And let's try to meet in real life someday.
Oh my God, that's a dream. I will also say that I feel like I'm in Chicago and a friend of mine works at the Art Institute here, and I'm going to go look at photography. I feel like that's another, like, the way that your book bleeds out into other places. Like I might roll out some old rock and roll and go listen and then listen to some Rolling Stones.
I think there's a playlist for the book dropping tomorrow.
Oh my God, where?
Large Hearted Boy?
No, but I'm going to find it.
He's a fantastic lit and rock and roll. He does a blog about literature and rock and roll overlap. And so I did an essay for him, and I think it drops tomorrow.
That is amazing. I am so happy. Your book's going to go far and wide, and I'm going to delight in seeing all the places it takes you and takes readers.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, everybody. Have a good evening.